Well, when we programmed this event, we thought we'll hear and see and learn about the art of the city and the science of the technology. But being from Silicon Valley, the reality, it's not a but, it's an and. And being from Silicon Valley, our reality, and I think it's prevalent now throughout all of the elements of our culture, is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and we want to measure the value of these things where we can. Some of it, as in the aesthetic and the art, hard to measure. It still has great value for us. But when we're dealing with buildings like the building in Boston that we saw, or the Empire State Building, we really want to ask ourselves how to measure the performance of that building, how to be able to know if we're making progress against a baseline of carbon consumption and carbon emission, or energy consumption or energy savings. And in the spirit of wanting to get from the art of the city and the science of the technology to the measuring and the managing of that and the reduction of that energy consumption and carbon emission, we thought it would be a good idea to bring Chuck Leitner on to our stage remotely by a telepresence. I think Chuck is in New York, and we'll get him on the screen, and we'll have Chuck Leitner, by the way, as you know from the program, is the chairman of SVP Global Real Estate, and also the chairman of the ULI Greenprint Center for Building Performance. And he's joined on this stage by Uwe Brandes, the Vice President for Initiatives at Urban Land Institute. So, Uwe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. ULI has been a friend of this convening for 4 years, and it's always great to come to this event. It's, of course, great to come to this event in San Francisco, this great creative city, and I look forward next year to attending and participating in Toronto. My name is Uwe Brandes. I'm Senior Vice President of Initiatives at the Urban Land Institute. It's been a very special year at the Urban Land Institute. We've been celebrating our 75th anniversary, and we've had a theme of programming across the Institute titled, What's Next? Real Estate in the New Economy. It's so great to be here and be part of the conversations as part of this convening that really are beginning to change the nature of the real estate industry itself. In some cases in very new ways. And over the course of this last year, we have brought in a separate nonprofit into the Urban Land Institute, founded as the Greenprint Foundation. It is now the ULI Center for Building Performance. And I'm here joined via telepresence by the chairman of the Greenprint Center, Charles Leitner. Chuck spoke briefly last year as well at the Meeting of the Minds. Chuck, I can't say enough about him. He's really bringing an incredible new perspective to how big data is generated through small data, and that is small data looking at energy performance of buildings, and then thinking about how that information can be really aggregated up into a new source of information for the real estate industry to act on. And with that, Chuck, I'd like to turn it over to you, talk a little bit about the Greenprint Center, its formation, and also what will be very exciting next week at the ULI Fall meeting of releasing the Volume 3 report, which will be the first report issued by the Greenprint Center since the merging with the Urban Land Institute. Chuck, it's great to see you up on the screen. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Uwe, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here again. As Uwe said, I had the opportunity to spend a few minutes with this convening last year via telepresence, thanks to Cisco, when you were all in Boulder, Colorado. So it's good to be back. Sorry I'm not there in person, but happy to be in front of you anyway and talking about the progress we're making at Greenprint. And I know you've talked about a lot of different things over the last day and a half or so, and Gordon, I'll try to tie these comments into what you've been covering and what you think are the important messages here. But we have some slides to share. I'll go through those briefly. As Uwe said, we're about to release the Greenprint Performance Report third volume. So we're very excited about still being here in many ways to start developing what's critically important in any data analysis, and that's a time series, a constant commitment to generate quality data and information over time, so it becomes useful as we try to develop real benchmarking tools for the real estate industry. I'll spend a minute on the next slide here after the introduction on the who of Greenprint and who Greenprint is. As Uwe said, we're originally founded as a non-for-profit. We thought that was a very important way to start this initiative, although our members are very much for-profit real estate investors and owners and financial institutions that are in real estate, for financial return. But our organization is not organized to generate a profit. In fact, we spent a lot of time trying to convince the IRS, and did so successfully on the eve of our acquisition by the ULI, that we should not only be seen as a non-for-profit, but also be seen as a 501c3 charitable non-for-profit as opposed to a trade organization, because we really were committed to a greater good benefit from our efforts. So that's a very important part of who we are. The practical part of who we are is that we're, as I said, an organization of real estate owners, essentially the piece of the built environment pie that deploys investment capital in the real estate market. And so our approach is to catalyze the capital side of the equation as you look at the broader built environment and create a connection between performance in environmental terms and performance in financial returns. And that really, at least in terms of this piece of the pie, we believe is the holy grail in terms of getting things to move forward. We are about leadership and commitment, collaboration, and importantly, action. This is a list of our membership, a strong representative cross-section of the major players in the global real estate investment marketplace, committed to being global. We think this is very much a global issue, although as with every real estate challenge or property challenge, you have to think globally and, at the risk of using a cliche, act locally. And that cliche does apply to this energy and environmental opportunity and challenge. So our membership is diverse, but very much committed, and they're committed to doing something that we think makes Greenprint somewhat unique, and that is contributing performance data. This is not a group. The CEOs of this group don't necessarily wake up every day thinking about energy and environmental data, but they do think about financial data all the time. And so we tried very much to create a construct that was analogous to what real estate investors are used to in terms of performance measurement. And they're very much used to very transparent now, very robust, very consistent financial metrics. And so we tried to sort of use that analogy to develop a tool that is useful for the industry and has benefits to the environment. On the next slide, we have a group, I hope a growing group of sponsors and partners. Greenprint is very much about collaboration and partnering. Part of the importance of being non-for-profit and people understanding that is Greenprint is not in this to create value in the entity of Greenprint. We're in this to collaborate, partner, work together wherever it makes sense to do so. The faster we get to where we're trying to go, the better. We firmly believe that the fastest way to do that is to collaborate. We have a great partnership, for example, with the London Better Building Partnership, which is a public-private partnership that's had great success in London, measuring carbon emission performance in the office portfolio in partnership with the mayor's office there. So we collaborate on London data so people can benchmark in London and also benchmark London against other parts of the world. Members can do the same thing. So we're looking for more of those anywhere we can find them, quite frankly. The NRDC has been a great partner in the U.S. through their Center for Market Innovation, doing a lot of case study and demonstration project work with them. And then on the right of this slide, we've developed an innovation partnership construct that we also hope will grow, which really helps us with folks like Cisco as an example, with educational content, best practices, and new technology, and how important connecting to those things is when it comes to performance measurement. Because once we've established the who, and we can go on to the next slide, here, which is a conclusion about the who. I won't spend too much time on this. We have, very significant people with our member organizations making a lot of commentary about how much more important environmental performance is becoming when measuring investment performance, when assessing value, whether it's value in real estate assets or corporate assets or what have you. So we have a lot of these out there, and I think people are hearing more and more from very significant folks that the connection is upon us, which is exciting. Next slide gets really into what we start to call the what of Greenprint. In fact, I think you went backwards there. We want to go forward on this. Yeah, there we are. Uwe mentioned the report. We are releasing the report publicly next week, volume 3. A lot of interesting metrics that I want to share quickly with you, and things that we're really seeing that are starting to show some very exciting signs of progress, with the caveat that this is still very early days. Gordon talked about some of the small data versus big data, as did Uwe. And in real estate, we certainly believe you have to start at the basic building block of any sort of analysis, which is at the building level, and then build from there. So bottoms up is really an important way to approach this, and it doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. Although I think some of the growth metrics that you're seeing in our report, Volume 3, really speak to a reason why I'm excited that significant growth is upon us, I think, in terms of this initiative. So our membership has grown significantly from 18 to 29 participating members. The next slide shows some other aspects from our report that are important to look at as well. You can see we're geographically diversified. We're trying to build a portfolio that mirrors the investment universe for the real estate investment industry. That starts at a global level and can be broken down into any regional or property type submetric index that you'd like. So real flexible data, but starting with data that again comes from the ground up, the buildings themselves. So the Greenprint portfolio is not a investment portfolio in a practical sense. It's a virtual portfolio, if you will, that's made up of properties from multiple different investors, and that we're using to track performance both at an individual property level. In this diverse portfolio, we have the major regions of the world represented. In those regions, we have the major cities in those regions represented, and not coincidentally, those cities are also the cities that are the most attractive and targeted investment cities and investment markets for the investment organizations that play in the real estate asset class. The next slide breaks this down a little bit further, and these are pages right out of our Volume 3 report that we will have in full next week, that, as Uwe said, that give an idea of what the capability and potential is for this portfolio. We very much wanted to show people what is, so they could dream about what could be, because we still have a long way to go to get the amount of data that's statistically relevant. But again, we're growing dramatically. Here you see we've had terrific growth in the U.S. in particular over the last year. There are some reasons for that. We still have a long way to go in Asia. There are some reasons for that as well. But generally, the trend is strong growth in the database from a regional perspective as well as from a property type perspective. We do track data in the major investment food groups, if you will, of real estate, office buildings, shopping centers, multifamily properties, retail properties, and hotels. The next slide is also a slide that comes out of our report that gets a little bit deeper into the what we're trying to do as far as measurement. We're really trying to set a path toward reduction of here in this case, energy consumption. So our portfolio on a year-over-year basis has experienced a 4.4% reduction in energy consumption. You'll notice our property set's a little bit smaller, 1,600 here, than the overall properties that we have in the survey, which is about 2,600. And as anybody who's tried to build a database knows, a big part of the process is cleaning the data. We had almost 4,000 properties submitted this year for a variety of reasons. Almost 1,000 of those properties are sitting in our holding tank, if you will, going through quality control for next year. And that could be quality control in terms of energy. It could be quality control in terms of simple things like building areas and occupancy levels and all the things that are really important. So cleaning data is a big part of this project. Not necessarily the most sizzly part of this project, but as we work through that data, we now have, as I said, a time series. We can do real like-for-like analysis, which is the only way you can build a useful performance measurement tool in real estate, like any other asset class, any other comparative opportunity. You have to compare properties to other properties that are like those properties, and you have to define those things, and that's why the industry participation is so important in establishing those definitions. And what is like for like? Does a building in New York have a comparative metric to a building in San Francisco or even London? And our answer to that question is yes. In particular, those are major financial markets. A lot of the buildings in those markets are dominated by trading floor operations, for example. And comparing those buildings, to each other has a relevant value. Whereas, you might logically think it's better to compare New York buildings to New York buildings, and that's really not necessarily true because of the diversity of property types that are in a market like New York. So that like-for-like analysis is really important. Some of the fun things around this, you can start talking about equivalence. The next slide is the other key metric that we've established, which is emissions, and where we're going with this portfolio so far in emissions. I'm always reluctant at this stage of the game to say that these are sort of absolute statements about what's happening in the real estate industry, obviously, because again, we want to get more and more data so these numbers become more and more legitimate over time. But the good news is we are already off to the right direction, which is a reduction in carbon. The equivalence that reduction really leads to is helpful because, as people certainly in the United States understand, carbon can be an interesting topic, somewhat politically charged topic from time to time. Certainly not the case in Europe and Asia, but that being said, helping people sort of relate emissions to other important metrics is a little bit fun, but also relevant. So already, and those who spend time with these equivalents know that these are not huge numbers, but a reduction that equates to over 1 billion barrels of oil being saved, getting automobiles off the road, 89,000 cars off the road, planting nearly 12 million trees. These things help with our membership and our constituency for them to sort of take carbon from an abstract and put it into a practical analysis. So the next slide will take you a little bit further into our report. And this is sort of the speculative part of Greenprint. And I know this conference tends to, for good reason, want to really talk about the future and want to be aspirational and speculate about what could be. And this is our speculation of what we think we can create with a very robust database. We really see an index and a series of sub-indices coming off the back of this effort where people can actually use this database and use the index to do real benchmarking of performance the way they want to do it. Not any different than the financial markets ultimately created with things like the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 and the Lipper Bond Index and so on. In real estate, we have things like the NCREIF Index on the private side. We have the NAREIT Index on the public property operating side. And we want to make this analogous and complementary to those financial tools, so people making financial decisions about properties and investments can correlate between energy performance and financial performance. We're reluctant to go out on a limb right now and say that green buildings are more valuable than brown buildings. There's a lot of dialogue about that. Our theory is that eventually the markets determine that, and instinctively our members know it's going to happen. So let's measure it and make sure we understand it and use this type of benchmarking and make access to this benchmarking available to as a broad a cross-section of the market as possible. And I think, as we get the numbers up, this could really get exciting. I wouldn't be surprised, and you can see from 2009 to 2010, we actually went up and then went down in 2011. There's going to be some volatility in these numbers early, primarily caused by the smaller database. And we'll normalize this more and more over time as we get more and more data and get it cranked into this thing. We are very open-ended with this, so we're going back with historical data so we can build our base with more information. You probably wouldn't get away with that if this were actually an index that people were trading on. And that's not what we are. People aren't trading on this index. Maybe someday they will. But right now, we really, as we get more data, we open the door to our members to give us historical data as well, so that our base does change, but it becomes more representative of the market going forward. So we expect a lot of volatility early, but we really think this thing will start to normalize and be very useful if we can keep growing the data like we have been able to do. So we can go to the next slide, which is really just a summary of where we're going. But that previous slide really, I think, sums it up in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. We really believe, like we've experienced in this industry and the financial side of things, that transparency, quality controls, standards, best practices all have to be part of the evolution that needs to take place. And in some ways, I like to think optimistically that we're in the middle of a revolution where this thing really is starting to open people's eyes and the conversation's really starting to ramp up. And I think, the beginnings of what we're experiencing on the data side, which is all voluntary, and the growth we're experiencing on that makes me believe that there's really going to be a J curve in this activity as opposed to a smooth slope forward, and we're going to really start to see some interesting connections and interesting work in the real estate investment marketplace that'll help drive change that will make the world a better place to live. So I really appreciate the time. I don't know, Gordon, if we're going to have some Q&A, but thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk to the group.
Thanks so much, Chuck.